Can you all see my the slideshow?
Not yet.
Yeah. Okay. I think I had to. Okay.
Okay. There you
How about
go.
now?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for that introduction. So I'm pretty excited to present on this today because I feel like this has been an area where I've been growing for probably the past couple, 3, 4 years. So I'm pretty excited to share some of the things I've learned along the way and a couple of the tools that I commonly use in my projects. I'm switching back and forth between screens, so my apologies if I'm like darting, my eyes are off over here. So we'll start off with maybe some introductions. And before I introduce myself, I wanted to see if people want to use the chat and just, I had 2 questions. One, what are you hoping to get out of today's session? And then 2, if you have any experience developing training around software. So if you could type those 2 answers into the chat. And while that's happening, I'll go ahead and kind of introduce myself and talk about my background, and then we'll come back to some of the things that people type in there. So a little bit about how I've kind of got into this role I'm currently in. Um, before before even getting to education and instructional design, I had a career in the military for about 6 years. And before I left the military, I was kind of a project manager where I managed maintenance projects. And these were usually about 60-day projects where we would completely tear apart a military helicopter. These were Black Hawk helicopters, and we would put them back together and then send them back to their unit. So I started doing project management pretty early on in my career, even though we didn't really call it that. It was just part of our job. Um, and then after that, I ended up getting into teaching English as a second language. So I spent a lot of time overseas and in the US at different universities teaching academic language skills for international students, both graduate and undergraduate students. So I did that before I got into ID. And then my first contract role was as an instructional designer and change management analyst. It was a contract role with a computer IT company. And so that's really where I kind of got into the change management side of things and started to build my instructional design skills. And then when I moved up to Alaska, I became just specifically around content developing for training. So that's where I started doing a lot of the video-based stuff that we'll talk about today, kind of really built on that experience. And so today I'm more of a consultant and also a training developer, but kind of mix both of those where I'm kind of a learning consultant and a training developer. So I'm going to go to the chat real quick before we move on. Jen saying more exposure to different people's approaches with learning tools. I come from IT where I've taken um, and provided many trainings. Most IT trainings are awful. Yeah, I've also had that experience with some IT trainings. I feel like that IT could benefit from partnering with more of us in L&D. Looking for ideas on software and procedures. Jessica and Shane says lots of experience designing software sims and scenarios, looking for more exposure to alternate approaches and methods for assessment. Great. Be interesting to hear what some of your experiences are, Shane. Helen says, I've only experienced with screen recordings using Storyline and Camtasia. Curious to see what other processes, steps. Okay. Elizabeth, developing onboarding training. Just kind of browsing through these now so we can get started. Then Amy says she's done some software training in the past, over 3 years ago, and curious to see what updates and best practices. Okay. Brianna mentioned she's hoping to gain insights from someone who has expertise in software training. Okay, great. Well, hopefully I'll hit on some of those today in my presentation, and we'll meet some of those expectations. Um, so usually when I meet with a team and we have a software training kickoff, one of the things that I like to do is have some type of slide deck where I kind of introduce the overall training approach. And the other part of it is kind of really explaining about my role, that sometimes I'm wearing different hats. And one of them is as a project manager. So kind of emailing and updating and making sure the training projects is moving along in the way it should. And so I think it's really helpful to kind of level set expectations at the beginning of these kickoff meetings to let people know what you'll be contacting them about, and that what role you'll be functioning in. The other one that I'm going to spend a little time talking about today is the consultant role, where you're drawing on different approaches, especially coming from change management, instructional design, and even software development, and how those inform how you consult and design your software training solutions. And then the last one is where you're kind of in more of the development role. And so I try to explain to people that one point I'll be moving into this role too. So I think it kind of helps people to really understand, those expectations about how you'll be interfacing with them. Moving on to the needs assessment, this is where I think when you're designing software training solutions, it's a little maybe different than how we might approach maybe some of our more regular training needs. And there's three kind of buckets that I kind of see informing this. And one is kind of a change management approach. And I'll talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail. And the other is an agile, what Megan Torrance from Torrance Learning calls a lot like agile management approach, which she calls LLAMA. So if you've heard that before, I think there's components of that I've started to include in my software training needs analysis. And then the last one is kind of looking at user adoption from a software specific standpoint and seeing how that people adopting a new piece of software walk through a series of stages, and trying to consult with that in mind as well, and analyze with that in mind. So these are kind of the three approaches that I think are slightly different than, again, a training needs analysis that you might think of from a traditional perspective. So one of the change management approaches I've found to be really helpful is the ADKAR model. And I'm going to stop really quick and just add something in the chat. See if I have this up. So I'm sharing a link to a document that should have a number of links for resources, so that as I refer to some of these models going through, you can open these in your browser and follow along if you want to, and multitask or just save them for later. So the ADKAR model, one of the things that I think is often missing when people just look at it only as a training solution is one, building this kind of awareness of the need for change, kind of asking the why. Why should they care? Why is it important for them to adopt this? And then walking through those different steps, like the desire to support and participate, kind of getting their buy-in. So there's parts of this that I include maybe in my questions that I asked during the initial kickoff meeting. Like how well have you communicated out to people that you're adopting this new piece of software? So this is one of the methods that I found kind of helpful to draw on in terms of change management. And there's a lot of different change management models out there. So usually what I do is try to pick a couple things from it that seem to work for my work context. Okay, this one's kind of there's a lot to this. This is typically how some organizations, especially ones that are using SaaS offerings, typically see a piece of software moving through their organization and people getting on board to adopt it. And some of this has a lot of overlap with change management models, and that's why you see, especially a lot of IT or software-based companies will use a lot of these similar terms in terms of awareness, adoption, and things like that. So one of the things that I take from this is that there is a linear process and there's different steps through these, and you can do a lot of research online and find examples of these. When I worked at Cisco, the computer company I worked for at first, they had a digital adoption platform, and it was like an interface that sat on top of the software that you designed training around, that basically you hit a button when you were, that was like up in the top right of the window, and if you needed help, you could type in what part of the process. And so you design your training solution around this adoption cycle. So you're like, okay, at the beginning, they need awareness. So it's like, hey, we have a new software offering, and here are some of the benefits of it. And then later, we would have the actual ways to trial and try this software out. So there would be parts of this process kind of built in through this platform that interface with the software. But a lot of us don't have, at least my current experience, organizations where we can actually have something that's usually a pretty expensive platform and to get trained on. So you kind of have to try to find parts of these and ways to impact adoption in a way that meets your constraints.
Randy, Shane wanted to know if that was WalkMe.
It was, yeah. I went through digital adoption solution engineer certification through WalkMe, and I think it's kind of, even though I don't use that today, it's kind of informed how I try to think about training around some of the things that I learned in that experience. Yeah. So the third approach, Llama, this is something that's kind of new to me, and what I've kind of done from Megan Torrance. She's really actively involved in ATD, and I think her book, um, I think it's Agile for Instructional Designers. She kind of breaks down this process a little bit more. But one of the things that I draw from this is the use of user stories and the flexibility of breaking these down into these smaller parts and kind of being flexible instead of just seeing it as a waterfall ADDIE approach. And for software development, especially when there's software that's changing a lot, I think that approach is often takes some of the pressure off you as the instructional designer and the team you're working with. A lot of the software projects I work on or that I'm supporting, sometimes there's changes right in the middle of them. And so if you're developing something, you have to pivot really quickly. And so I think being agile is really helpful for that. And one of the pieces, the user story that I really like from Megan's is when you're instead of just only looking at learning objectives, which I think is really important in the needs assessment, is kind of looking at a user story. And so as a blank user, I want to do what in the system so I can achieve this at my work. And so this is kind of the format you can use. And so what I've done is when I'm designing training is having a user story as part of that scope. So I'll give you an example using Microsoft Word. As a project manager, I need to review and provide feedback on the marketing campaign proposal drafted by the creative team using track changes in Word. So this would, if people were totally new to Microsoft Word and we were helping them understand how to use the track changes feature, we would be getting bunch of different user stories on what their roles are and what they need to provide for that. So hopefully this kind of makes sense, but this is something that I've added to my instructional design process, and especially in the needs analysis and the design, to kind of help scope out. And one of the things that's helpful about this is it can kind of help you decide, okay, this is in scope because I have 10 project managers and they need training on this specific task. Maybe I only have 2 of this other group, so maybe it's not as important. So this kind of helps you prioritize what's in scope and what's out of scope in your software development training. The other part of Llama that from Megan Torrance, I think that is really helpful. She talks about the primary learner is often an iconic member of a broader audience, and it's recognizable to stakeholders as a realistic portrayal of a typical individual. So in her book, she actually has a number of questions that you get really granular, where you might interview, say, a person you're thinking in this stereotypical role about their experience with learning, what their learning preferences are, their demographics and their background. I think some of the constraints I have is that I don't often have access to these people, but where I feel like the learner persona comes into play is if you have different user groups and they're very different in their experience. Like in my current role, I deal with a lot of industrial maintenance workers who don't have the similar background as some of us who might work in more typical office environments. Education, their work environment, their typical workday looks totally different. So this is where I think if you're developing a piece of software training solution and you have these users are all going to be using the same system, but they come from different background, it can be really helpful to reach out to them and just figure out, hey, like, how do you typically take in training on a new system? Because what I found is that these 2 different groups that you see represented in these images learn very differently. They have preferences around training that are not similar. And so kind of being able to capture that in your needs analysis can be really helpful. So you're not trying to do a one-size-fits-all approach to your learners, which I've done in the past because I haven't had access to this, and then they haven't adopted the software, and they said, well, yeah, this doesn't work for us. And so I think that's really helpful, is really trying to drill down on the learner personas. I next want to move on to the project management approach. And this is something I picked up from Tim Slade. So probably a lot of you are familiar with Tim Slade's work. As a new instructional designer, he's got a lot of really helpful templates, and his book is really helpful as well. And he has what he calls a project plan training, project plan. Can't speak today. And what I found is really helpful for this is having this as a system or a way to collect all the information and kind of function as a contract. And so this keeps my software training projects on track. And you can kind of capture some of this information in this initial kickoff meeting and kind of scope the deliverables. And so this example you see on my screen, this is actually the beginning part of a software training project that I worked on last year. It's not complete by any means, and I've taken out some things. But you can see down here, like the scope communication plan. So that's coming from that change management perspective, where you're like, oh, I need to tell them why this is helpful. What are the benefits out of them to try to get their support, raising that awareness. The other part is business vocabulary glossary, comparing the old and new. So if you have new terms that are used in the software system, you can kind of help people get up to speed with that. So these are just a couple examples of who these people are. This is specific to my current work environment. But if I had taken some of those learner personas, then I might actually fill those in here, just descriptions of, oh, this is the engineers, this is for those office workers. The other part of the project management piece that I also picked up from Tim Slade is what he calls an instructional design document. And this often changes depending on what type of project I'm doing, but usually there is some type of prioritization that I have here. I usually have a list of topics, and these are topics of the software itself. So this would be like Microsoft Word track changes. I'm adding comments. I'm just showing the add comments. So I'm going to show people how to do that in this little software training video. Of course, the audience, and then this is where I would put the learning outcomes, and then I might also include an additional tab where I put the user stories. And so I might have a couple user stories that go with this learning outcome to help me further prioritize what my need is for that training, if that makes sense. So these are kind of some of the more project management. Again, thinking about at the beginning, I talked about those 3 different roles: wearing the project management hat, wearing the consultant hat, and then also wearing the training development hat, which I'm going to be turning to next. So hopefully this kind of gives you a little bit of a sneak preview of kind of the different roles and different approaches that we use when you're going through a software training project like this. So before I jump into the tools, these 3 tools I'm going to talk about today, they are the 3 that I've found useful for my work environment and just the constraints I have in terms of kind of being the primary person doing a lot of the development for video and software training. And so if I had a larger team, there might be other tools that might work better. But these are the 3 that I use. So Camtasia, one of the reasons that I ended up moving from the video tool that I used before, which is Adobe Premiere, which I still have access to, was one, it was quicker. I could interface with it much more easily. There was a lot more learning support. If any of you have kind of went on TechSmith's website and checked out some of the resources they have, as well as some of the things that their group posts on LinkedIn, their YouTube channel, they do a really nice job of creating learning materials, not only just for using the video, but for instructional designers specifically. So I think that they are really targeting that market of instructional designers and learning developers, which is really cool. The other thing is there's a lot of templates. So you can kind of just drag and drop video into it, and a lot of the animation's done for you, which is Adobe Premiere, the tool I used before. It's much more complex, like I found with some of the Adobe tools. So it requires a lot more learning and a lot more work to get up to speed on. So this is one of the reasons I chose that tool. The other one is WellSaid. Now I know in our industry of learning and development, there is some pushback on using an AI voiceover tool. Some people think it's you should be using voice actor as much as possible. I find for software training, especially using that agile approach, like oftentimes there's changes being made and changes to the team. If I can turn around and use something that sounds like a realistic narrator and increase my turnaround time, then it's kind of a win for me. So that's why I've kind of went towards an AI voiceover tool like WellSaid. And one of the things that I think is really cool is that they have come a long ways. When I first started trying to use digital voiceover, it sounded really bad and robotic. And it's came a long ways. And I think it's going to continue to get better. And so that's one of the things I'm excited about, continue using this tool. The last one is Scribe. Scribe is a newer product that came out, I think, within the last year. and it's also an AI-based tool. One of the things that is cool about Scribe is it functions as a browser add-on, which I'll demonstrate here in a bit. But you just click a button and it tracks your mouse clicks within a software. And then you can go in the document and it has little screenshots that it takes instantly. And then it also captures what you're doing on screen and gives you a short description that you can edit. So this basically creates an instant job aid with a couple clicks as you go through a software process. So where I feel like this could be really helpful is if you're at the front end of a training development project and you're just hand this off to somebody, or you got on a call with them, you're like, I'm gonna have you, hit record. I want you to walk through this process with me. And then they can kind of describe it, and then you can kind of go back and forth. So I see this as kind of like the first step in a software training solution if you were to enable it in your environment. That being said, I've got pushback. My IT is not happy with that because of some of the vulnerabilities. So I've just been able to demo it, not actually use it a whole lot. So there is going through that process. And as a new AI tool, you do have to look at the risk on that. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second before I jump in and see if there's any questions that have came up, Katie.
Awesome. Yeah, and there was a lot of thumbs up and hearts as you were talking about some of those tools, Randy, just so you know.
Okay, great. I see Amy has her hand up.
I think Jen was first. Go ahead.
Jen, did you?
Jen, can't hear you, Jen.
I think you might be muted, Jen.
Or the source is wrong.
How's this?
Better? I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. I'm really excited about Scribe because I've done a lot of these how-to softwares in IT, and I make all the screenshots myself and the descriptions. And I'm curious, like, what is not secure about it? Can't you just do it on a separate system and then bring your work over?
I think I haven't really done a lot of digging on the back end. I'm in a kind of unique area or position where we have federal guidelines because my company is a national infrastructure, meaning that it's oil pipeline. And so our cybersecurity protocols we have to have SOC 2 type documentation if you're familiar with some of that cybersecurity certification. And it's beyond what most organizations have. Some of the software training that I've been able to get enabled, like the WellSed, they had all that information on their website. And so I was able to pull that, where this, I think, is a newer startup, might not have all that documentation yet. So I think because it's recording your whole process of what you're doing on screen, there's a question of like, what are they doing with that data?
Right.
And I think if you were to go to the enterprise subscription, you're probably getting a lot of those protections that you might not have. Like, I'm just using the free version right now, and so I'm not going to record much and do work on it because I would kind of be violating our policies and procedures around data use.
Right, because you're probably doing something proprietary, not what everybody else is doing. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. Great question. Amy, I think you had a question.
I had the same question, so thank you, Jen.
Awesome. Great. I love it when that happens. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, and if there's no further questions, I'll get into going through some of the tools. So see if I can change my screen sharing here. I'm going to stop sharing real quick. It's always the shuffle, between PowerPoint and screen. So bear with me here for a second. This could be your your cognitive break for lunch.
While you're shuffling, Randy, Brianna said that they just got approved for an AI voiceover tool and are super excited to use it to decrease time and rework to create voiceovers. So
That is great.
yeah.
Yeah, I've been really impressed, and we'll talk about some of the things. Just that increase in turnaround time has been really helpful for me. Okay. I have the multiple tabs thing going on at once where I'm trying to figure out which is what. Okay. I think I'm good now.
You're doing great.
Thank you. I was telling Katie before I came on earlier that I am not a Zoom user. And so trying to change from Teams to Zoom is always a perpetual problem for me.
I'm with you, Randy.
Okay. Are you all able to see? Should be a Word document.
Can you zoom it?
Yeah, I can do that. How's that?
Good. Much better.
Okay. All right, so I just generated some text here. And what I'm going to do is go to this browser extension. And so I've already installed this. You can see this Scribe AI documentation. And so this pops up, and what I can do is just click capture, and it will start the recording. And so now it's capturing my browser. And now I'm going to go over to, let's see, review. And let's say we're going to show people. Nobody's used Microsoft Track Changes before, so I'm going to show them how to do that. I'm clicking, if I can remember how to use it. We'll say we're changing this, and then I'm going to add a comment. Okay, so let's say for this part of the process, I just wanted to show them how to add a comment. And then let's do one more. Let's say we accept that comment. Oh, there's not any track changes. Take this part out. Okay. All right, now I'm going to click stop, and we'll say complete. I'll just show you a quick, there's pause capture. I think with the Pro version, you get Smart Blur. You can move the controls or you can delete it. So I'm going to click stop capture. This opens a new tab. Okay, and so this is my guide that, I don't know if you all can see this that well, but trying to see if I can make that bigger. So this gives it a title instantly. It shows how many steps. It also tells you about how much time it takes. And now I can go in here and I can change the link. Now this is to my company OneDrive. So if I wanted to, I can go in and actually change this link. And then it's showing us the first screenshot where it goes to. Then down here, it's showing what I did on the screen. So if I want to delete one of these steps, I can easily go and delete this. And so on through all these. So if I want to go in and actually change my text that I'm telling them in this process and how to do it, I can say click track changes to begin tracking any changes in the document. So I've just made that change. Let's say all this other stuff I didn't want to show them. I just did too much, so I'm going to delete all this stuff. That's a lot. I'm not going to go through. I'll just show it the first part. So once I'm done editing, I can either share this out. You can actually have a team that you're part of. So imagine if you're a group of instructional designers or you're working with somebody else in your organization, you could add them to this team, like in a lot of cloud-based applications. The next thing I can do is I can share this. Let's say I want to download as a export as a PDF. So this is what you're allowed in the free version. I think in the Pro, you can export as HTML, and there's a couple other options there. And then you can do a smart embed to some of these other apps here. But I'm just going to do it as a PDF, and I'll export this. And I'll view. All right, so this is what you get, kind of a, I can click here, this will go to a link. So it's an embedded link in this PDF, and it shows my different steps that I did in that process. So yeah, this is pretty much a little bit of the basics of Scribe. Again, I've kind of just scratched the surface of Scribe, but where I see this kind of going back to our overall software training development process is if somebody's first starting this and thinking about what it takes to develop a video and all the work and time and effort it takes to give voiceover, to actually record your screen. If you're doing a lot of your edits in this, it's much easier to do this in this collaborative doc to get everybody kind of on the same page in terms of your process than it is for even storyboarding or something like that. Not to say you shouldn't storyboard or script, but I think it does help to kind of go through this process. If somebody just is like, oh yeah, I already know this process, I work with this software all the time, then they can kind of use this as the first part of your training development process. But really cool tool. If I was able to, I would love to get this enabled in my organization, because there's so many people that I think could really benefit from having all these different work processes that they use on the computer, and just being able to, send those out to their employees or their team. But alas, I have some cyber restrictions. Yes, Amy.
I'm curious, in your experience, Randy, how easy is this to update? Like, say, there's an update in the software, you have to change a couple steps in this 20-step process.
Yeah. I think this is all saved, like, it's almost like you have your own cloud storage set of files on this. So you can go back to this, and I think you could, I'm thinking what your question, because like, are you asking, like, could you go back in and re-record and add to that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if that's under the collaboration or no. So it looks like you can combine. So I wonder if that would be part of it.
Oh, I see a little pencil on the screen itself. Does that let you edit that step?
Oh yeah, you can definitely edit that step. So you can go back in here and edit parts of this. But again, there's some of this, I think, that is you'd have to get probably the higher version. So I think if you were looking at doing this within your organization, or that would be probably looking at what are the capabilities of Pro versus this. But I think just for getting started, this might be a good one. But yeah, great question. Any other questions about Scribe before I move on to another tool? I'd say the other thing was an alternative to Scribe that I think a lot of us probably have used is something like a snippet tool or Snagit. Trying to add those images into like a Word document for a job aid. When I discovered this after doing that for a long time, I was just like, this is amazing. It does it instantly. So definitely saves some time for sure. Okay, so I next want to move on to talking about Well Said. So I'm going to sign into my account. Before I do that, I want to show you a couple things from Well Said. Well Said in terms of options for plans. If you're just starting out and you're maybe a freelance ID, this could be like what you might be looking at. It's $44 per month. You could include that in your cost. I say in my development team, we went to the creative license. So we're paying this much per month, $89 per month. And that does pretty much everything that we need it to do. Again, the big thing is it has all voice avatars. And this over here, you only have 24 voice avatars. So that has been kind of nice, especially trying to find the right voice that you want, is having that selection. So I'll go ahead and start a new project. So when you go into Well Said and you create a new project, I'm going to do ATD Puget Sound, and I'll call this, client name, software. You have two different options here. One is beta. I played around with this, and this allows you to change the tone. So if any of you are linguistics nerds like me, you get into pronunciation, where you can change like how each word is pronounced, and change the pitch and things like that. Sometimes I try to play around with it and I'm still trying to figure it out. So I just usually stick with the regular current version. So I'll create a project. I think I have to pay my subscription. I think I need to update it, so I might not be able to show this today. Yeah, I was supposed to tell my boss that we need to update the subscription. Anyway, when you go in here, let's see. I'll just show you real quick. This is some projects I'm working on. You would type in and then you get to choose one of the avatars. So let's say this is your text. You can go in here and pull up an avatar model. So right now I have Joe selected, and then you just create single take. Because my subscription is not active, it's not going to show you. And then it gives you an option of downloading MP3. So you can download MP3, a WAV file, MP3 plus text. One of the things that I found really helpful is if you have this project file saved in here, and let's say back here I have, I have this scene from here. And I can go back here, and this text is still up here. So if again, thinking about software changing, I can go back and change this text, spit out MP3. I've just changed that instead of going back into a studio, recorded my own voice, walking through that, and I just spit out MP3, and then I go into my video editor, Ripple Replace, and it's taken me seconds, within a minute to do that. So typically when I'm in this tool, what I'm doing is I'm creating scenes for each one of the steps, just like you saw the steps of walking through, you know, the steps of Microsoft Word track changes. If I'd map that out, maybe in that guide that I created in Scribe, you know, I'd be doing something similar, maybe taking that and making a script of each scene. And then I can do a group export. So I just select all these, and then I go here and I download that, and that will create an exported zip file that you can have all your voiceover just in one part. So if you label them all right, then your next step would be to go into Camtasia or whatever video editor you're in. So this one, my license is current, so I'll actually be able to show you guys how that works. Apologize for that. I got the email last night actually, and I saw that I needed to send them a new credit card information, so I haven't done that yet. So Camtasia, one of the things that that I really like about it, like I said before, is the support. But the editor, I find it to be very intuitive and user-friendly compared to other video editing software tools I've used. So real quick before I get into it, I just want to show you a little bit of, show you around in this. Before I do, Katie, how am I doing in time?
We have 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay.
Yep.
So this is the where a lot of the, but most of my work takes place in this area where I'm adding media. But you have annotations you can add, transitions. So there's a lot of transitions. And that was one of the things that I usually only use a couple of these, but again, you have a lot of options within, and they keep on adding more. Zoom and pan animations, I use these quite frequently, where I'll be able to zoom in into a process, especially if you're trying to focus on one little area of a step. The annotations part, what I really like too is there is a spotlight tool and a highlight tool. And then you can also have animated, you can have an animated, I'll show you real quick. So you can have an animated box around something. So there's a couple of different ways to just draw focus to, just like you would if you're doing a job aid. Think about this in video. You're able to kind of animate stuff on your screen around different parts of it. Let's see, the other thing, I'm going to go ahead and real quick, since we're up on time, I'm going to go ahead and just take a screenshot or a screen recording showing how I would maybe screen record parts of a process. So I'm going to go back to that document. And I'm going to hit record. So one of the advantages of recording in Camtasia versus Snagit, which is Snagit's the screen capture tool, snippet tool, which also gives you the ability to record, is that you can animate your mouse and move your mouse around. If any of you have used Adobe Captivate, it kind of has this similar view function where you can change where the mouse goes to and how smooth the clicks go. So I can't change it if I've recorded in some other tool that's not Camtasia. But if I'm recording with Camtasia, like I'm about to do, let's see, am I recordings. Just a second. I don't know if I chose the right. I chose the wrong screen. Let's start over. Okay. Can everybody see that? So Camtasia Rev is their new. I don't really like it personally. I think it's a little flashy. You can play around with it. It'll blur your background. So I leave that off. I can have my integrated webcam here. And then I can choose what webcam I want. So I'll do that. Oh yeah, I'm sharing on system audio. I'm just gonna let it record for a little bit so I can show you. All right, so I recorded the other screen, but here we can see I just recorded part of the Zoom screen. But from here, what you would do is you can go in. One of the things that if you were doing a software training, I have the video and the audio separate. So I'd get rid of my audio probably. And this is where I would import my media. And I would go to like my sample, whatever I have my voice files that I downloaded, I pull those in here and then I pull those in the timeline. Oftentimes when I make these software trainings, what I find is that the steps that I've recorded, usually they're longer because I'll try to let my screen record longer as I'm clicking from here to here or having somebody else do it. What's cool about Camtasia is you go to visual effects and you can click this clip speed and I can drop this clip speed on the timeline. Now over in the properties, I can change this and this will, instead of being at regular 1.0 speed, I can speed this up to be 2.3. Or I can even slow it down. So if you imagine having each one of these as individual little scenes down here on the timeline, and then you dropped in your voiceover over top of this, you would just be using this clip speed to tweak it to make your clips time with your voiceover, adding your animation on top of that, and highlighting anything like that. And that's briefly what that development process would look like. And I wanted to do a demo today, but I didn't have enough time in putting all this together. But I know I didn't get quite through it. Is there any questions or people want to see more? I don't want to just overwhelm people with software, but I hopefully give people a brief introduction to it. Amy.
I love these brief intros. Thank you, Randy. Something I want to elevate that you mentioned is you took out the original audio first, right? And then you imported the voiceover audio, and that's partly why this works, right?
Right. You know, and I have did, so there's two people I'm working on a software project right now. And what I've kind of, it is kind of an agile approach, and I work really well with them, and they're kind of a unique team. But we'll get on a call. In fact, I was supposed to have one right before this meeting, but she wasn't ready yet. And she'll have the process laid out. She checks with her supervisor, and they have a slide deck they're working with. So she's kind of already figured out what you would do in Scribe. And she gets on a call, on a Teams call. I hit record on Camtasia, and then I record all that. And then I'm just taking what she's done in there, and I'm creating the voiceover text from that. And then I just delete her audio, just like you asked. Like I delete her audio from the Teams call, And then I've already captured her process because she's walked me through it. And I'm kind of like coaching her through it. I'm like, yeah, take a little more time with this process. And so she's describing what she thinks the voiceover would be, and I'm just kind of fine tuning it. But again, she's somebody that's like, we've kind of worked out this process where it really works for us, where it might not work for everybody.
Love this idea. Thank you.
Yeah. Stop sharing. Any other questions regarding Camtasia, or where would you like to see anything else? I guess one of the things that, how are we doing on time, Katie? I want to check in with
2
you.
minutes.
2 minutes. The last thing I would say regarding Camtasia is that if you go to the media bin here, there is in their library, there's a lot of assets that come with it. So these are all the audio assets that come. But you can also download additional templates as project files, and then you're just dragging and dropping like your video into it, and they've already have the templates made. So that's one of the coolest things that it used to take me a long time to be like, okay, like how am I going to transition this? Do I have a cool placeholder text for some of this? And the assets that Camtasia has are pretty cool. And then they make that process a lot less painless or painful.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Randy, for sharing the initial frameworks and then all of these tools, and kudos for navigating all the tools and doing the Zoom call. You're awesome. And
Thank you.
thanks everyone else for joining. Make sure to, give some reactions and thanks in the chat and elsewhere before you head out. And hope everyone has a lovely Monday.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
cool.
Thank you, Katie. I felt like I went overall pretty well. I mean, there was,
Yeah.
I feel like timing, I was just kind of like winging it a little bit.
Well, this
was
is
like,
your first time kind of doing this, right? So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I actually thought the pacing went really well. Like I didn't feel overwhelmed at any point, and it was like, yeah, I feel like each of these tools could be their own hour, like alone.
Yeah.
So I think you did a good job of kind of like seeing how they connect to one another and how they could each be used separately. So
Cool.
thought it
I
was really
appreciate
good.
that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to use Scribe like 3 years. Like I was like, oh my gosh, the amount of screenshots I
Oh,
had to
I
take.
know. And I like, it was crazy. Like I used to I would go get the images from Snagit, and then I would have like these templates, paste them in, doing all this stuff. And it took me so